Can you introduce yourself for us, please?
Sure. My name is Sam Shahsahabi. I'm the chair of the Visual Art Department at Lakehead University.
Walid Chahal, continuing lecturer in sociology, Lakehead U.
Todd Dufresne, Department of Philosophy.
Thank you. So what is all of your reason for being here today?
I'm personally here to support Palestinian cause and also promote divesting from any collaborations, research that we have with Israeli universities and researchers. Israel has bombed over 12 universities. All the universities in Gaza has been destroyed, and that says genocide by itself, killing professors and teachers and destroying schools and putting nearly 700,000 kids and preschools and university students out of the education, and this is one way that we can support them.
We are Lakehead University Solidarity with Palestine, and as Sam was saying, we would like to see the university disclose its investment, right, and divest its investment from corporations that are benefiting from the genocide that is happening in real time. So we would like to see our university moving forward on that, right? And as well as this group that is organizing, and we put a letter together for academics and students and those that are affiliated with the university in one way or another now or in the past to sign it, right? To call for an immediate and lasting ceasefire, to allow aid to enter Gaza.
I'm standing here because I'm supporting my colleagues, I'm standing with my students, and I think I'm standing on the right side of history, which is to stand against genocide. This is the simplest issue ever. You're standing on the right side of history, and when people ask you, what did you do in history? What would you have done? This is what you do. Minimally, you stand with the people that stand with social justice and against evil. That's it.
What do you believe your duty is as an educator to facilitate student process, and do you believe it's an essential part of education?
Absolutely. As both my colleague mentioned, we have responsibility to bring injustice to light and kind of talk about it, create projects in terms of art and art practice. We gotta talk about best way to communicate with our society through art projects and bring this injustice into light. That's one way that we can educate not only our students but also our member of publics that otherwise they may not care about paying attention to the details of this genocide. This is a killing machine, that's a war machine. It affects our economy, it affects our philosophy of life, it affects every aspect of our dignified life, and we as educators should stand on the right side and educate ourselves too. Like, we're a student, we're learning. Many of us haven't been exposed to such atrocities. I myself grew up in Iran. I exposed to 8 years of war. I've seen mutilated bodies, and I've seen horror that I don't want anybody in their life to experience it, see it, witness it. I don't want anybody go to the exam entry to the universities while missiles are coming down and windows are shattering. That's horrible, and you don't want any human being to see that. So we have our duties as an educator to respond to it, educate anybody that we can, including ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, as an academic and the approach that I follow, it is about social change. So, in other words, I mean, if there's discrimination, if you have injustice and so on, we encourage the students to stand up and do something about that. So as an educator, doing this, right, and now we're seeing it happening in Palestine, in Gaza, right? And also, we subscribe to the elements of democracy, justice, rights, fairness, right? And we believe in international law. We believe in the UN Charter of Rights and Freedoms. We believe in the ICJ, the International, the World Court, right? And we believe in the International Criminal Court, right? We believe in these recognized bodies. And so why are we not speaking about this? We haven't been speaking about it. Like, why is, in this case, why is our government and our state, the Canadian state, has not been speaking about this? They've been silent all these years. And now with the genocide happening, right? And we appreciate actually that this becomes a student-led protest against injustices and against the violations of human rights, right? But where are our politicians not doing enough? And as our colleague said, we are on the wrong, as a country, we are on the wrong side of history. So we need as part of our ideals, democratic ideals, right? We need to be moving in the right direction on that, and fighting justices regardless of where it is occurring.
For me, the history of philosophy is the history of power dynamics, history of knowledge, the history of the rationalization of power in some ways, but also the opposite. It's the history of resistance to power and authority. And the point of my teaching practice is to show the interconnected strings of power that are sometimes ignored. This includes the exclusion of women from philosophy and other traditions. And really, in my teaching practice, what I'm trying to do is show the connectedness between these categories that are now called social justice categories and how they relate to our everyday world today, and how we can interrogate them by looking at, for example, classic texts in the history of philosophy and ones that are outside that tradition as well. So to try to challenge the tradition, and by challenging the tradition, challenging existing power structures that we live with that help justify sometimes and rationalize injustice, but at the same time have the capacity to show us a different path, because it still exists within the tradition as well. Opposition exists within the tradition as well.
Yeah.
And that's what we're trying to do
Well
as well with our students. Show them that there's alternatives within the tradition, within the Western tradition as well. And like my colleague said, also learn from what their issues are today. For me, I'm interested in climate change, I'm interested in oppression around the world, and the thing is, these are interconnected problems. So that's what we do.
Why do you believe disclosure is important, not only in this issue, but in general, just in terms of transparency at schools and other institutions like this?
But we want to know where our money goes, right? I mean, whether in relation to our pension money, or, many universities invest with companies, right, that are profiting from what Israel is doing in Palestine, and more specifically from the genocide, right? So it should be an automatic thing that if you are part of the liberally democratic societies, you should say no to this right away. But why is it that we're not doing this? We haven't been doing that, and if we don't do that, we're actually allowing the genocide to occur and to be perpetuated, to be reproduced. But we're seeing, so it's hopeful to see the students shaking and shocking our systems and our leaders to get them to move in the right direction.
Well, I'd say that universities are supposed to be leaders. They're institutions within our societies. They're places that people flow through, and while they flow through, we stay here as faculty and as academics. And it's important for us to hold these institutions to account, and for them to reflect the values that are ever changing, and to ensure that our institutions are actually standing on the right side of history. And as it is right now, silence in the face of this atrocity, these war crimes, this genocide, is unacceptable. And in the past, universities have stood against things like Vietnam, events like Vietnam, and it's made some difference.
Yeah.
What we want to see is more difference. We want to see change, and in this sense, I'm afraid our students are leading more than our academics as a general rule. That doesn't mean academics aren't standing up there. We are, but I'd like to see more.
Yeah.
And actually, in this sense, our students, as in Vietnam, are our teachers. And so I'm hoping over the next months, hopefully not months, but in the near future, that more people stand up with us and stand with the students who stand on the side of social justice.
Yeah, and if I may add, I mean, on this theme, as part of our duty as intellectuals, right? If we're not doing something, we're being complicit with the genocide, right? We're actually giving rise to more genocide to be committed, to more atrocities to be committed. If we don't address them, if we don't talk about them, we allow this hegemonic order to be reproduced if we're silent about it.
Right. And we can't just be merely critical of what's happened in the past. That's easy. It's being critical about what's happening now, which is much more difficult for people personally and also just intellectually.
Yes.
But the point is to actually apply these lessons of history to the present day.
Yeah.
And that's what we try to do.
Yeah, and in words and action. I mean, this is why we're here. We don't just talk about this as an intellectual exercise in the classroom, right? We want to be involved in the community to produce change, whatever that change is required, wherever this change is required. So whether fighting discrimination, fighting sexism, fighting racism, fighting classism, right? We do that. And so we can't be silent about a genocide, for God's sake, that is being committed. Where lives are being lost, where innocent civilians are being killed or injured, right? Where the infrastructure is being completely destroyed. So we cannot be silent about all of that.
There's also a precedent for these student protests leading to divestment. For example, McGill divesting from South Africa in the 80s. We saw, again, widespread protests which led to divestment from Darfur, and again, with fossil fuels. Do you think this is different, and if so, how?
That's a good question. I mean, it's similar and different. It's similar to what has happened, for instance, let's say, in South Africa, right? In the sense that you have an apartheid, and you have an apartheid in that area, right? I mean, that is exhibited by Israel in terms of its treatment of the Palestinians, especially in the West Bank, not just in Gaza, in terms of, because Gaza is an open air prison sieged by land, sea, and air, right? So it's similar in that sense. We have an apartheid regime, and it was shown this from the 2020s. B'Tselem, a human rights organization, pointed that out, and then other human rights organizations pointed that out, including Human Rights Watch, International Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, Al-Haq, and so on, right? So I mean, you have that. All of this is going on, and also in relation to what was happening in Vietnam, the revolution happening from the bottom up, not from the top down, right? But in the case of Palestine and what is going on, because of Zionism and Christian Zionism that exists in the West, it just complicates things. And then Europe feels that they're guilty about what has happened at the time of the Holocaust, right? So they support Israel, have been supporting Israel and claiming that it's a democracy. It could be, there are democratic elements to Israel, especially within Israel proper, but not in terms of its treatment of the Palestinians, right? So the Zionism aspect of it complicates change, right? And complicates our stance at the political level. And of course, the media doesn't do justice to that, corporate and mainstream media, when they're repeating the Israeli narrative. So then change is blocked, right? change doesn't happen, and doesn't happen quickly, or it's not going to happen quickly. But I mean, after that, the blatant atrocities that Israel is committing within this genocide, where students and people are seeing what is happening and seeing what Israel for what it is about, right? Rather than the rhetoric and the discourse that they formed about what they are and what they do, right? So there is hope in that sense to be able to move in the right direction.
There, of course, are differences between the past and the present, but the thing that interests me more are the continuities. The continuities for me involve the dominance of certain ever-changing forms of capitalism, and the word that we haven't actually mentioned yet is profit.
Yeah.
And the universities and our pension plans within our union, they have investments. Those investments are meant to forward the profitability of our enterprise. And insofar as our investments that we don't know exactly enough about right now are put in tar sand oil and the military industrial complex, well, I have something to say about that. I don't want my pension based on evil operations in the world. And so I'm more interested in the continuities between these events. I'm more concerned about the fact that we seem to be living in a capitalism that is not just a fully disaster capitalism, but a capitalism that is after the end of capitalism, that is reaching out and destroying the planet. And this is a murder capitalism, not just a disaster capitalism. And this is what we're talking about. And this is what we were talking about in the past in every single instance. So that's what I'm here for. This is what I want to teach students about. And this is why we need some sort of transparency from the university. Let us know where our money is being invested so that we can make a decision about whether or not we want to continue with that path. I say we don't want to do that. And I think my colleagues in general, if they knew, would have to make a decision. And I'd like to think they'd make the right decision if they had the information. So the lack of information is the problem. Let's get the information, put it before people that are maybe not willing to stand here with us today, and maybe they will end up standing on the right side of history when they see the facts and figures.
We do have the elements of democracy, or some of them, despite the monopoly capitalism, and especially in the context of neoliberalism, right? Where, if there is a problem, then it becomes yours or your family or your community under the neoliberal framework, right? So then the reality is being hidden from us through the capitalist ideology or the Zionist ideology or the Israeli ideology, right? And there is a link between the three of them. So then some of us are kept in the dark because of that. At the same time, we're in principle have a democratic system, so we need to use that to move in the right direction and to produce social change, right? So but as Todd is saying, we're allowing the forces of capital to take over, and instead of informing us, right, the opposite happens with the not only misinformation but disinformation, right? So the wrong side then of what is going on becomes portrayed to us as the reality, right? So I mean, when Israel has been constructing and reconstructing things, that they're a democracy and they're after rights and justice and whatever, right? And then blaming, with their rhetoric, they portray themselves to be the good guys and the Palestinians as the bad guys and the terrorists, right? And in the meanwhile, they've been involved in the Nakba that started in 1948, which becomes structural, and it's been continuing, right? So this is what we get then. This is what we get, rather than the reality of what Israel is about. And also, the reality of what a capitalist structure is about, what is capitalism is about. destroying the environment, exploiting people, exploiting workers, right? Producing stuff that is not often safe for us, So we need to also link that power, right, of those that are economically powerful, right, to the ideology that they're producing. But just because, their ideology becomes dominant, it doesn't mean that it is without contestation. And this is what we're here for, to contest all of the above.
What are your feelings about the opinions that these protesters at the universities are illegally occupying the space? And what, if anything, do you think we can learn from the administrative response at U of T, for example, as opposed to U of Alberta?
Universities, technically speaking, are, say, private spaces, but they're dedicated to the public mission of educating the young. The idea that students can't encamp there, I think, is ridiculous. There's a long tradition of that. In addition, it's counterproductive, in my opinion, for administrations to do at University of Alberta. That's incredibly dumb. In fact, I am amazed that we haven't seen, from what I can tell, any president of any university actually stand with them and say, I really want to thank you for doing what it is that we do at a university, which is raise awareness, and for actually sleeping here overnight and doing the work for the rest of society. You're doing our job, and you're showing that we've done the right thing here in universities by training you this way. And we may disagree about this or that, and we may not divest in this and that, but at least actually recognize that what they're doing is part of the tradition within the university. In fact, it's the best part of the tradition. It is ridiculous to try to remove them forcibly. And the truth is, they're fighting the right cause that'll only make the university proud 10 or 20 or 30 years from now when they see that their students stood where they should have stood. And the ones that didn't should be embarrassed. They should be embarrassed already, but they will be embarrassed eventually. They have the right to be there, a moral right, a spiritual right, an intellectual right, a historical right. And the universities that are run by administrators that to come and go should simply recognize that as former academics, that this is who and what we are. The students are the best of what we are and what we do. You can disagree, you can debate, and they should, in fact, publicly do that. It's not a problem. It's not a problem at all from my perspective.
Yeah, so I mean, the only thing I would add is that there is the public side of that, of the university, in the sense that they're funded by the government, or governments in Canada, right? The provincial governments fund them, and then also the students pay tuition fees. So it's part of their democratic rights to protest, and as Todd is saying, to speak freely and to have that safe space to talk about it. If we don't let them exercise their democratic rights on campuses, then we have a big problem in this case, right? And then, of course, the problem to a great extent has to do with what has been happening in the U.S. What's been happening in the U.S. that the image of the peaceful protesters on university campuses are being tarnished in the sense that they're involved in hate speech and so on. No, I mean, they are peaceful protesters. You may find one or two, people that may be involved in this type of rhetoric, but by and large, they're peaceful protesters. And in Canada, similarly, we have, on our campuses, many of our protesters standing for Palestine and Palestinians, right, in a peaceful way. That should not trigger a response like what Calgary U did or the Alberta U did, where they called the riot police on them, on a peaceful protesters, and let them act in a violent way towards the protesters, right? But again, as we mentioned before about that climate that is being created, where we're weaponizing the state in this case in Canada and the state in the US are weaponizing anti-Semitism, and the conflation is wrong. I mean, you cannot make the link between criticizing Israel to anti-Semitism, especially when you have many of the protesters are Jewish people themselves, Canadian Jews or American Jews or in other places, could be European Jews, are part of the protesters. So, and then the media repeats this as well, including our CBC, right? You know, in the sense that it's, they say, oh, well, the Jews, our Jewish people don't agree with that. And in that, they're actually referring to Zionists, don't agree. So the Jews, like any other group, are not monolithic, right? And yeah, we need to allow people to protest. It's part of their democratic rights to stand for justice, to stand for human rights, right? And if we don't do this in such a safe space, where are we going to do it?